Thank you for joining us. This is part of Pearson's Memorable Teaching Moments author webinar series. And today I'm really excited to be facilitating this conversation with three of our authors, Nigel Slack, Alistair Brandon-Jones, and Nicola Burgess, plus two special guests, academics in the areas of data science and teaching and learning enhancement. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Richard Townrow. I'm the UK product manager at Pearson, who commissions resources and textbooks for operations management, as well as for finance and accounting related subjects. And today's session, if you're just joining us, today's session is called Generative AI, Useful Tool or Teaching Distraction. We do have a little bit of housekeeping before we get running with this. We know many of you are probably working from home. We sometimes get some background noise, so we're keeping everyone on mute to begin with to ensure everyone hears our presenters. But the chat is open right away, so please say hello, put your questions in there. We have a packed agenda and lots to get through in the next hour. Thank you if you've pre-submitted a question. We've incorporated some of those questions into the session today. To try and make sure some are covered. We did have a large volume, so apologies if we don't get to everyone's question. But feel free to kind of live dive, put your questions into the chat, because Alistair or one of the team, one of the panelists is going to be monitoring that and picking up things there. And then at the end for the Q&A session, you can raise questions and you can actually speak those questions, but just raise your hand. Click to raise your hand at the end and we'll bring you off mute, so you can do that. After the session, the slides will be shared with you together with the recording, along with an opportunity to request anything from Pearson that you need. But yes, before we begin this session on generative AI, let me just say that Pearson is incredibly grateful for the panel of presenters who've prepared to speak on this topic. It's of great interest to us as an organisation to find out more about how generative AI is going to become more part of everyday life and everyday study. It affects those we partner with and work with every day, who are university teachers and academics who want to give the right directions to their students. And I think we're all thinking about that at the moment in the last kind of 12 months or so. And we at Pearson are developing some exciting projects using generative AI. But today's session is not about what Pearson are developing, and there'll be more to come on that on a separate occasion. But I think we can all agree there's more to learn. There's more ideas yet to be kind of discovered and generated about AI. So I hope that today this will be a chance for learning for us all, myself included, that we can take away further ideas about how we can best use generative AI to support higher education teachers running courses, as well as students doing their at-home learning. So three of our presenters are the authors of our market-leading title, Operations Management 10th edition, as well as related textbooks, such as a kind of cut-down version called Essentials of Operations Management 3rd edition, and a more postgraduate aimed textbook, Operations and Process Management, which is coming into a new edition later this year. So let me just introduce those three authors. Nigel Slack is Emeritus Professor of Operations Management and Strategy at Warwick Business School and an Honorary Professor at Bath University and Honorary Fellow of the European Operations Management Association. Alistair Brandon-Jones is a full-chaired Professor in Operations and Supply Chain Management and Head of the Information, Decisions and Operations Division at the University of Bath School of Management. He's also an adjunct professor for Holt International Business School and Danish Technical University. Nicola Burgess is Professor of Operations Management at the School for Business and Society, University of York. And our two special guests, Dr. Powell is Director of Teaching and Learning Enhancement at Warwick Business School, whose research interests include the design of online learning content, transformative learning, and more. And Lukasz Piwek is Associate Professor in Data Science at the University of Bath and has had a number of research interests, such as use of mobile apps in behaviour change and big data gained from mobile devices. But without further ado, we're very excited to hear from our panelists. So I'll pass over to them now. I'll pass over to Nigel in the first.
Richard, thanks very much indeed. Can I start off by trying to answer the question that's posed in our title here, Generative AI, Useful Tool or Teaching Distraction? And to save you any undue anxiety before the end, let me tell you the answer now. It is both. It is a useful tool and it can be a distraction if you don't use it properly. Can I explain a bit of a caveat to start out? We're not experts in this. We are a group, as you know, a kind of author team and academics in operations management. And we've been not struggling exactly, but trying to understand the best way to exploit this capability, which is really new to many of us. And that's an issue with such a large number of people viewing at the moment from all over the world. Some of the things we'll say will be really kind of well known to you, to some of you. Other things might be new. So forgive us if we are either ahead or behind your particular curve. Let me try and explain the kind of coverage of what we're between us going to be covering this morning or this afternoon or this evening, wherever you are in the world. First of all, let's talk about what we mean by generative AI. Again, not in any great detail. We'll do that fairly briefly. And we'll do it by me, first of all, talking about what I've been doing as a novice, getting into this area to help his teaching and writing. Secondly, how did we as an author team react to Gen AI when we realized a bit under a year ago that how much it was going to impact us in our books? Thirdly, very, very briefly again, what have other academics been doing with Gen AI and what seems to be the consensus, if there is any, that's starting to emerge about how it can best be used? And how really, and this is the major bit here, how might the rise of Gen AI affect our teaching and how we write cases and examples for teaching? So it's not about research, it's not about administration, it's about teaching and the way it might impact our teaching. Okay, first point. Oh, sorry, like to blame Zoom for that, probably it's me. First point to make is just the sheer number of different apps that have an AI component in them. These are just some of the literally hundreds that have emerged over the last 12 months or so. These are just some of the ones that I've either used or been exploring personally. Some are more useful than others. For example, here's a prompt. Prompt, of course, as most of you will know, is the question that you put into an AI. Write 100 words or shorter introduction to a webinar for academics on the subject of using AI in the teaching of operations management. And what came up? I didn't specify the coverage or the tone, just a very, very simple, very crude prompt. Normally, of course, you'd recital and refine the prompt. And that's what came up. It's not bad. It's not quite the tone that I would have personally used. And I could have changed the prompt and refined that far better. And also...
Welcome to our exclusive academic webinar on AI and teaching operations management. Explore the intersection of artificial intelligence and academia as we discuss cutting-edge applications reshaping the landscape of operations management education. Join fellow scholars in discovering innovative AI tools.
Now, all I did there is ask for an elderly male, British accented voice to do that. And you know, it can just take the cut and paste of that text that I put into that particular app and give me a voice, not pretending to be my voice. Or, for example, here we are, prepare a 1-minute video introducing a webinar on using AI in teaching operations management, again, using a male British voice. Didn't specify the coverage or the scenes and anything, put it into another app, and what do I get?
Imagine a world where academia and artificial intelligence converge, where the landscape of operations management education is revolutionized. Welcome to our exclusive academic webinar on AI and teaching operations management. We invite you to a journey of discovery, exploring cutting-edge applications that are reshaping the very way we teach and learn. Witness the power of innovative AI tools designed to elevate teaching methods, enhance student engagement, and optimize curriculum delivery. Take a deep dive into the future of education, where artificial intelligence serves not just as a tool, but as a catalyst for transformative learning experiences. This is your chance to exchange insights and ideas, to explore the limitless possibilities that AI brings to the realm of academic operations management instruction. Don't simply watch the future unfold, be a part of it. Welcome to the future of education.
Okay, a couple of things here. First of all, you notice the watermarks all over the place. That's because I'm simply using the free version of this particular app. Also, clearly, they're going to use the stock footage that the app already has and select amongst that to put it together. So it's not going to be tailored in any kind of perfect way at all. Nevertheless, it is a reasonable first attempt at it. Just for reference, this is me speaking into my webcam on my desktop. But who's this? Operations management is about how organizations produce goods and services. Every product you use and every service you experience comes to you, courtesy of the operations managers who organized its production. They may not always be called operations managers, but that is what they really are. They are the people who design, run, and improve the processes that produce services and products for their customers. إدارة العمليات تتعلق بكيفية إنتاج المنظمات للسلع والخدمات. كل منتج تستخدمه وكل خدمة تجربها تأتيك بفضل مديري العمليات. قد لا يسمون دائما مديري العمليات، ولكن هذا. Now, just to emphasize, this is me speaking for, I think, slightly under 2 minutes into the app, just to get my facial characteristics and voice, etc. And then me just cutting and pasting from Word text into the app that will then have an avatar of me talking. Not quite with my voice, but with a reasonably good approximation to it. It gives me something of a transatlantic accent towards the end. But again, if I wanted to, if I got the premium version of this, and again, I emphasize I'm just using the free stuff here. If I wanted to, I could adapt my avatar to stop my hair sticking up quite as much, for example, change my voice, whiten my teeth, whatever I wanted to do with the thing, and then automatically translate it, because I asked it to, into Arabic. I don't speak Arabic. Listening to that, people who've listened to that who do speak Arabic tell me it's a perfectly accurate translation, though the intonation is somewhat strange. But again, for a first attempt at a novice spending no more than minutes doing this, it's quite impressive. It impressed me anyway. Then I started thinking about it and thought, when would I use this? I might, I have to say, because I've just written a lot of stuff, and therefore I can take what I've written and cut and paste it into something that could translate into different languages if I wanted. If I paid for this particular app, it works out at, by my calculations, at least somewhere between $2 and $3 a minute. Would I do that? It's kind of marginal, possibly under some circumstances, but not always. And that's the decision I think we keep coming back to with the use of AI in teaching here. It's kind of impressive, it's kind of useful, but it's not useful in all circumstances. And one of the big issues we face is, when do we use this? I mean to say, it can be a good gimmick in a lecture theatre, for example, and let's decry that, because presentational kind of variety in lectures is a good thing, is a useful thing, I feel. So sometimes we may use it simply to give some variety. But again, it's a marginal decision in a lot of cases. Lukasz, do you want to kind of just take us briefly through, given that, and given I am the amateur blundering around in this field, what do we need to understand before we start getting more serious about using it?
Thank you, Nigel. Yeah, so what do we mean by, in broad sense, by generative AI? So it refers broadly to a range of artificial intelligence technologies that are capable of generating new, unique content across various media, which includes text, images, and sound. And it does it by learning from existing data patterns. Now, this learning process is actually one of the most unique and breakthrough features of generative AI. And make no mistake, it relies on a heavily advanced machine learning models, such as, for example, adversarial neural networks or autoencoder neural networks, which for training require enormous quantity of data, so large data set, those specialized algorithms that are used to train it, and also substantial computational power. So this complexity and cost can be, at the moment, only achieved by a very small number of companies around the globe. And while Nigel correctly said that there are right now hundreds of those generative AI tools that appear on the markets almost every month, all of them are pretty much rely on the core models that have been developed by OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, and Meta. There are some smaller players like Hugging Face or Anthropic, but really those four, so the companies that have server farms that are visible from space, and they employ neuroscientists and mathematicians of global level in terms of their expertise, only those companies are actually capable of training this type of generative AI models from scratch. What the other companies are typically doing, they're using a process called fine-tuning to adapt those huge models to their specific narrower purposes or data sets, such as the text-to-image or video conversion that Nigel presented. So just to briefly sum up, that this generative AI capacity for self-guided learning and the replication of complex data structures that you've seen in a short demo by Nigel, with just a minimal human intervention, represents one of the most significant breakthrough in the evolution of AI that we've experienced in last 50 years, since pretty much Alan Turing published his first paper on the topic. So that's very briefly about what we mean by generative AI. Back to you, Nigel.
Lukasz, thank you very much. One of the analogies you used earlier, explaining things to me, is all these apps are like many different automobiles. They're actually driven by 4 or 5 engines between them, which kind of explain it to me well. Thank you. Okay, just to kind of prove, if you like, just how it, well, I suppose the fact that so many people are listening to this is proof of how much interest there is. The Harvard Faculty Lounge is something I look at regularly. A lot of useful articles from Harvard Business School, obviously trying to sell their teaching material, but nevertheless very useful. The top 5 last year were all of them, every one of them were about AI. And that is an utter change from the year previously, as you would imagine. So lots of interest. How did it impact us as an author team writing these kind of 3 operations management books, and I do another couple of operations related books as well. So we're always editing and re-editing these books. How did it hit us? Well, it hit us around the kind of beginning-ish of last year, and we were very close to finishing off the manuscript for one of those books, a book called Operations and Process Management in its 7th edition. We looked at the capabilities of AI, and mainly, you could see that it clearly would have implications for how we researched examples and cases in the book, but we'd largely finished that manuscript, and we couldn't delay the submission of the manuscript. Otherwise, Pearson would shout at us, and we wouldn't want that at all. The main issue for us was the examples at the end of each chapter. Like most textbooks, we put examples and problems at the end of each chapter. We call these examples applying the principles. So what I did was put all these through Chat-GPT 3.5 at the time, and was impressed, not by all, but by at least some of the answers that came out. So I'd just like to take you through the options we felt were available to us at this rather late stage in the writing process. First of all, we could ignore and keep it as it is. In other words, just bury our head in the sand. Secondly, we could abandon the applying the principles section, the problem section. We could try and make the examples AI resistant in some way. And I should say now, there's a huge amount of controversy about this. There appears to be an emerging consensus that you can't really do this at all. But that consensus hadn't fully formed at this time. Or we can try and embrace the potential of AI in some way. Now, abandoning the whole thing, well, we shouldn't waste those examples. We could make them into worked examples that the students would find useful. Making examples AI resistant, well, you can make it more difficult for an AI to answer, to give a good answer by introducing subtlety or emotion, ambiguity, particularly it can't always deal with, originality, and make them case-based to a specific set of circumstances. We could have done all those things, so we did do a little bit of doing that. But mainly we kind of very quickly came to the conclusion that we didn't really have much option but to embrace AI and move the emphasis onto critiquing the answers in inverted commas that AI will be generating. There are advantages and disadvantages to all of these options for us. Of course, ignore and keep it things as are, or we wouldn't have to do anything and nothing would be late. Abandon the whole idea of exercises at the end of chapters, reduce pressures on space. That's getting less important as more books are being sold as ebooks rather than print books, and less useful for the users of the books. Make examples AI resistant, more useful to users, and good learning for us, which is quite a strong advantage for us. It would force us into making our minds up and learning how we could best use this new technology, embracing the potential of AI, more useful for adopters, good learning for us, but there was the risk that it could delay submission of the manuscript. What we decided to do is a number of things. We reduced the number of questions at the end of each chapter from 10 down to 4, often using the case-based ones that work best in terms of forcing the students to think about the answers to those questions. And we encourage students to critique the answers given by AI. Now, what I've found out since doing this is that the word critique doesn't translate very well in all languages. In English, there's a difference between criticism and critique. In criticism, you're trying to defeat an argument. You're trying to destroy a proposition of some kind. In critiquing, you're trying to add to and test out an argument. So it's not as negative a thing. So forgive me if you are a native English speaker and understand perfectly the difference. But if you're not, you might need to think about that. So what we now have is a section called Go Beyond the Bots in Applying the Principles. And it's introduced by this blurb. What might an AI-generated answer, in inverted commas, have forgotten are the assumption it is using valid. Would the suggested answer be valid for all types of operation, that is service or manufacturing, B2B, B2C, and so on? What more can you add to the AI analysis? So we are specifically asking students to look at the AI-generated answer and add something original to it from their own imaginations or knowledge or workings out. And we'll come back to this point because it's an important one later on. Right, next, what have academics been doing? Well, almost like the appearance of apps. Again, you get paper, we're seeing papers every week on this idea of what academics are doing. I just want to look at two teams. Probably the best known are Ethan and Lilac Mollock from University of Pennsylvania Wharton School. Go onto YouTube, and they've done loads of very useful videos. They're enthusiastic. Ethan Mollock's also got a good blog on Substack, which is worth following as well. And from the European side, some really interesting work's being done through the Case Centre by Martin Kupp and Urs Müller. You might think case teaching is the very antithesis of AI-aided teaching. It's not, and they very artfully point out how one can use AI as an aid to case writing and case teaching. And I will talk more about how we do that later on. But many of the ideas we've developed are based on their ideas. Academics seem to be looking at 5 areas in particular. First of all, going from left to right, on routine admin, things like data analysis, student tracking, and timetabling. Now, I know a lot of publishers have been trying to develop products that are using AI in this way. I have to say, I don't do an awful lot of teaching these days, so I haven't been involved in that, but I can see how it could be really useful. Secondly, student assessment. This seems to be a really active and worrying area, in so much as big arguments over student assessment, particularly plagiarism detection. I am increasingly convinced that it's going to be really difficult, if at all possible, to try and prevent students using AI. I don't think it is at all. I think we have to embrace it. You can't stop them doing so, and you certainly can't detect plagiarism. If you even try, you introduce so many biases, particularly for students whose first language isn't the one you're teaching in and assessing in. AI as a team member, Alistair will talk about how he's been doing that later. MCQ, multiple choice question generation, yeah, a lot of really useful stuff. A lot of the apps are aimed at non-university teaching, that is primary and secondary level education, but nevertheless can be adapted. In content design, curriculum design, yeah, it's actually quite good at doing that. Topic coverage, example creation, yes, could be good at doing that. Teaching material generation, slide generation, I haven't used it for, although I know it can be. That introductory slide that was up very first of all was done by Lukasz, but I know he used AI to develop that slide. Text to video, as I said earlier, can be useful, but is a little bit of a gimmick. Topic summary creation, particularly useful. I've already used that several times, and it works quite well with human intervention. Again, that's a point we'll keep coming back to. Case writing, again, case and example writing, yes, used it a lot. Personalized tutoring, this is an area where I think probably AI has the most potential, frankly. Adapting tutoring to individual learning styles, reacting in a Socratean manner almost to the answers that students give. A lot of interesting stuff being done. I would particularly recommend you look at what the Khan Academy in the States are doing in terms of using the Socratic method within an AI framework. Very useful. There appears to be a few things coming out of all this work. First of all, everybody agrees, and I would heartily endorse this, the more you use generative AI, the better results you get. You just have to keep using it, both to understand the emergent properties of the technology, but also just getting used to how it is developing and how your own skills in interacting with it are developing over time. Secondly, at the moment, it's all about developing the prompt that you put in. At the moment's an important caveat here. Okay, in some places, particularly the States, you can take degree courses in prompt engineering. Nevertheless, there is a school of thought that says, don't waste your time, because very soon the AI itself will be able to develop far better prompts that help you. And if, as I do, you use Bing, the AI tends to use is Bing in its creative mode, that not only gives you a source link to many of the points it's giving it in its answer, but also tells you what prompts you might want to use further. And I find that particularly useful. There's this concept of the jagged frontier. AI is developing, it's developing relatively quickly, but it's not developing evenly. Some things are moving faster than others, so aspects of what it can do. Capabilities vary, so AI is good at some tasks and bad at others, and it's difficult to predict how that's going to go. Sometimes capabilities stay still, sometimes they race ahead in different areas. Implication of that, you just have to keep using it, you have to keep looking at it, you have to spend time kind of just seeing what is happening in the world of AI. Again, quote, I think it's from Ethan Mullick, the AI you use now is the worst that you will ever use. You must keep in touch with what is happening. Important to stress the ethical implications. Okay, there are already clear ethical implications, and as a textbook author, I'm very keen on things like copyright, obviously. But there will be other ethical implications that will emerge and become important. So I think it's important to stress, particularly to students, to what those might be. Again, you shouldn't believe anything it says. Everything needs continual checking by putting in different prompts, by using different Gen AI programs, by just using old-fashioned Google, if you like, or even going back to the original papers that they're quoting. And I've come to believe this more and more. Assignments stroke homework, as we knew them, are dead. You won't beat generative AI, but you can exploit it for better learning. There is one of those issues, I believe, where it's difficult to have a compromise between old-fashioned assessment and AI acknowledged assessment. You have to go over totally to using AI and assess in a different way. How might Gen AI, it's difficult to say, affect our teaching, how we teach, how we assess, or how we write for teaching? Let's look at a couple of examples. Nicola, do you want to start?
Yes, of course. Thanks, Nigel. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my experience over the last year or so with sort of embracing and coming to terms with AI and the implications that it has. And I would describe that journey as essentially, I think I'm on a pendulum between enlightenment and then despair and then back again. And looking at some of the comments that I'm seeing in the text, I think it probably resonates with a lot of you. In terms of enlightenment, I found AI to be really good for actually thinking about, well, how do I structure this lesson? And so using prompts that have a bit of detail about who I'm teaching, what I'm teaching, how long I'm teaching for, what level the students are, and so on, actually creates a pretty good structure for the lesson that helps me to plan. So from that sense, you know, there are some really, I find that really useful. And as Nigel says, the more you use it, the more useful it becomes. We've also seen examples of students using AI to support processes of learning and discovery, and we actively encourage that. So I've actively encouraged it within my lessons and taking the time to talk to them about AI, you know, what it's useful for, how we use it, the ethics of using it, the biases that it might generate and things like that. So doing that within the classroom, getting students excited about using it, giving them permission to use it, empowering them to use it, these are all things that are really very positive. On the other side, of course, we see students using these, and again, I've seen comments in the chat talking about how students are reproducing the outputs of AI. They are not critically engaging with the content. They're not using it to, they're not checking the output. So I've just recently done a batch of marking, and there's been a couple of assignments where I bothered to check the references because actually I've been interested in them. Oh, that sounds really good. Try to follow it up. Sadly, it doesn't exist. So we need to make students aware of these issues, that there are biases, that there are phantom references, and ultimately they need to use it as a platform to build or to develop their learning journey, to challenge it in intelligent ways and use it as a tool for learning. And finally, again, this has come up in the chat, some students are vulnerable to submitting assignments that are either partly or wholly AI generated. As lecturers, I think many of us will be able to pick these up because, I mean, I've had one recently. It was repetitive. It didn't engage with content. It missed a lot of the module's content. So there were things in there that would have failed the assignment anyway. But when you look at it, you kind of can see that it's being generated by AI. And this is a shame. And we don't really want students to fall into that trap. So I think we need to think about, well, how can we deal with this issue? What can we do? So one of the things we can do is we can introduce a rule-based approach. So this actually comes from the front page of an assessment for an assignment that I was set. So this isn't something that I put in there. This is sort of university guidelines. So we start by saying, okay, so we recognize artificial intelligence is useful and that it may be applicable and you may use it, and that's a good thing. But then we start saying, well, if you use it, this is what you must do. You must provide screenshots of the question and the AI-generated response alongside an explanation of how that content has been utilized. And you should note the relevant reference alongside each screenshot. When you submit your assignment, you need to also complete and submit a declaration. And that declaration requires you to explain the use of any AI. You need to set out why you used AI. You need to set out what it was used for, and you need to say which AI was used as well. And then to add to that, if we perceive that AI has been used in a way that isn't aligned to guidelines, and you may be called for a viva or interview in order to demonstrate intellectual ownership. And finally, we tell students, you must not use any tool or service requiring any subscription. So I think you will agree that what we're saying here is, yes, we understand that this is useful, that it could be beneficial, that we encourage you to use it. But then everything we say thereafter is telling us we don't really want you to use it. And if you do, then you could get yourself in a lot of trouble. And then the outcome of that is students, of course, either are too scared to use it or they're too scared to admit that they're using it. Okay, so in my view, that certainly isn't the answer to the problem. It might form part of the answer, but it's certainly not the whole answer. And so what we're saying is that we need to develop much more of a capability-based approach that starts in the classroom, where we give student permission to use AI, teach them how to use it in a meaningful way. But we emphasize that it's not a replacement for learning, it's a tool for learning. So it's something that they can use. I heard the phrase the other day, the blank page syndrome. And I felt actually that really resonates with me, and I'm sure that resonates with students. You can use it to kind of inspire you as a catalyst for thinking, but it's obviously something that we need to use in an intelligent way. We can also use AI outputs or AI within lessons to actually teach students skills of critical thinking and judgment, teaching them how to frame problems and ask insightful questions, teaching them how to interpret the results of the algorithm check its trustworthiness, so we can avoid those phantom references and so on. Encourage them to seek clarification and think about the biases in that output. Last one, Nigel. So I think to leave it there and to sort of really pick up on what Nigel said is that we need to see AI as a tool for learning. We also need to recognise that if we don't see it in this way, then it can be a detriment to student learning and also student attainment if it leads them then to use it inappropriately. So we need to exploit AI for better learning. I'm now going to pass over to Dot, who is going to give an example of how she has attempted to teach students to use AI in an appropriate and ethical manner within the classroom. Over to you, Dot.
Thank you, Nicola. Yeah, I think what I'm going to talk about here was an attempt, and I will say it was successful to a point, and I'll explain that point in a moment, to introduce that capability-based view of AI and enhancing the capabilities of the students. So I was working with some foundation year students. These students are same age as undergraduate first years, but they'd had slightly lower grades and various widening participation features that meant that we allowed them onto our foundation year. Slightly, you could say maybe slightly less academic than most first year undergraduates in a business school, but not really that much. What I found interesting was that when I asked them about their existing AI understanding and practice, some of them were aware of tools such as Chat-GPT, others weren't, and the ones that were using it as a glorified search engine and were actually getting worse results than they would have got from Google and not really understanding why that might be the case. So the aim of my activity was to introduce them to a more productive way of using AI and to also do it in a way that gave them some awareness of ethics and also some prompt engineering skills. So the activity was based around a reflective journal that they write on a weekly basis. And what I was doing was using a prompt to turn the AI into a coach that would help them to reflect on a critical incident and help them to build it into something more detailed and reflective that would consider things like their emotions and feelings and their learning points for the future. So if we move on, this is my prompt. I think I'm a Mollickite, which I may have just coined that phrase, you know, the one of the many followers of Mollick out there. This prompt, which I don't expect you to be able to read, but you can download it using the QR code and you'll be able to have that when you get the slides afterwards. The prompt gives the AI a persona. It tells the AI who it is, tells it what to do, and it's designed to get the students to reflect, as I said, on a critical incident. So I give them this prompt to copy and paste into either Bing or into Chat-GPT. Took loads of refining, but it is based on a prompt that was provided by Ethan Mollick. So if we move on, the output, here's an example using a bit of a reflection of my own. So it works quite nicely. Bing says, I'm your friendly coach. I'm here to help you to reflect on a critical incident that you experienced. And if you just move on, Nigel, to the animation, we get the, oops, back one. I'll just tell you. So there we go. So I crashed my car. That was my critical incident. I type it in, the purple bit is what the students would put in, and the response that comes from the AI is, I'm sorry to hear you crashed your car. That must have been very stressful and upsetting experience. How did you feel? How do you feel now? Share your emotions and your thoughts with me. Now, using the AI like this means that you are not asking the AI to generate content for you that you could then copy and paste into an assignment. What you're doing is you're asking it to give you prompts, so you do the typing. If you copy this and paste it into your assignment, it's your original content. And so this was the point I was making about the ethical and responsible use of AI. So if we move on, my other reason for using this prompt, and maybe we could just move through, because I'm aware of time, maybe just move through all the animations as I'm speaking. The idea of this was to help them to see some basic principles for prompt engineering. And these, again, are taken from the Mollick article about assigning AI and 7 approaches for students. So I worked through these principles with students and helped them to think through how they might use AI responsibly using this sort of prompt engineering. And this is where some of the learning came in. So if we move to the next slide, what I found was that prompt engineering is very tricky. The students actually got stuck probably on point 1, where point 1 said, tell the AI who it is. Students didn't know who they wanted the AI to be. And I think that relates to the point on the right-hand side. I know the sort of teacher my students need because I've been working with that sort of student for years. They don't know what sort of student they need. They're new to university. They're new to the whole higher education learning experience. They don't actually have the ability to use the AI in that way, in a very effective manner, because they don't know what they need. Also, the AI tools are unpredictable. So we got some interesting results. We got results that weren't quite what I was hoping for. And so, and as it says in many places, AI will give you different results every time. The AI is a moving target. It's moving so quickly that these students that I was working with in 3 years' time will be way beyond me and where I am in my knowledge of AI. So I had to keep saying to them, this is the starting point, but you are going to get, over the period of your time at university, everything is going to change. So I've noticed that my colleague who actually gave me this screenshot is actually in the webinar this morning, so this afternoon, so apologies to Mike. AI is becoming more and more human-like, and my colleague was talking to Bing about poker. And if you move on to the animation, you'll see it got angry. It said, are you trying to trick me or test me? Do you think I don't know the rules of poker? Do you think I'm stupid? Including using really sort of unhappy emojis. So be careful what you wish for. AI is becoming more and more human-like in not necessarily a good way. So as I hand over to Al, I think he's going to talk about this slide, but just to say, I think one of the biggest challenges I found, which explains my difficulty and explains why I will do different things with students next year, is that in terms of Bloom's taxonomy, I wanted students to be using AI in creative and evaluative and analytical ways, but actually they just needed to understand it. And until they did understand what it was all about, they weren't able to move on in the ways that I'd hoped. But I'll hand over to Al now.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I can't share my screen because Nigel's sharing it. So Nigel, if you can just forward it through, that's fine. So what we're sort of seeing here is the way in which perhaps Bloom's taxonomy and other taxonomies can be useful in thinking about the kind of rise of Gen AI in taking learning sort of further up this chain. And if we move forward, you know, things like Google and Wikipedia, of course, sort of help in that kind of very low level of remembering and understanding. And to some degree, Chat-GPT 3.5 still kind of speak to those ideas. They're a bit more sophisticated, they're a bit more streamlined, but in many respects, they're doing much the same thing. What's fair to say is perhaps some of the emerging AI technology is taking us further up into the application and analyze particularly space. And that, I think, is which gives many people concern, because it's almost a question of, well, what's the student then doing in terms of informing their own learning? But there is still quite a lot at that top end that arguably AI can never fully do, because it speaks to ideas of creativity, it speaks to ideas of generating the questions that then Gen AI is providing answers to. And that's what I'm going to give an illustration of here in my next set of slides. So one way in which I grappled with this was in a typical group assignment. So Fresh Lunch is a case study that myself and a colleague of mine at the University of Bath, Vangelis Giannikas, developed for one of our books recently. And it's a classic operations case. It looks at issues of capacity management, demand forecasting, issues of layout in a restaurant, etc. And so there is a typical deliverable that I would see for an MBA group or a master's group, which is a presentation. And in this case, it's an online presentation. Sometimes it's in person. And they essentially are addressing the questions that are raised in this sort of consulting challenge, where they've had to essentially understand what's going on with this particular case. And it's a very open-ended kind of type of challenge that they're set. They're basically given the information and then have to work their way through, do analysis, and then come up with suggested improvements. But I then added a second reflective exercise, which was to think about how you worked in your group, this 300-word reflection. And the twist was that group wasn't just made up of you for MBAs, it was made up of you alongside your Gen AI friends, and you could pick who you wanted for that. And building out from that, then it was this idea of really embracing Gen AI rather than sort of fighting it, rather than saying, well, I think probably people will do this behind my back. It's saying, this is part of your team, just like your very smart friend that you ask for a review on a paper for is part of helping you along the journey of a research piece of work. It's when you're doing group work in the past and you're bouncing it off your mum or your dad. This is kind of the same mindset that I was trying to approach here. So to do that, of course, I set some advice and got the groups to think about the fact that just like that friend in your group, you don't want to trust everything that Gen AI says. It's not necessarily the truth, and you need to fact check. We need to think about different perspectives and biases that are often introduced by Gen AI. We need to think about the ideas of learning rather than simply just delivering content. And then we need to think about context. And so, the quality of our prompts influences information. There are all sorts of ways in which the information may be specific to the size of the firm, the sector of the firm, the country you're in, different kinds of motivations for the organizations, et cetera, et cetera. And then we can think about issues of things like feasibility and risk as we go through. So encouraging people to force them to use Gen AI. It's a requirement effectively, but to do it in a smarter way. And so what that then led to was groups going in very different directions. And this is just one illustration of that. So you can see part of the case that there's a comment about struggling to understand what's going to happen in terms of demand for various meals. And the group's looking at this data here and thinking, okay, that seems to be worth digging into. And so they go on to the Gen AI, in this case, Chat-GPT, to run some prompts. And so initially they're asking Gen AI if it can do this kind of analysis, and indeed it can at a basic level. And then they're prompting through to look for patterns. Gen AI is developing some ideas for it. And from that, it's then kind of the students are essentially prompting for further information. So whilst Gen AI is giving them some information, it's not giving them everything. Effectively, we can't get to a point where the students are just provided with everything. We have a situation where those students, for example, have picked up trends and then have probed further. They've actually spotted that in this case, ChatGPT has made a mistake, and they've basically said, I think you've made an error in terms of your estimate for the future demand. And Gen AI said, oh, yes, you're correct. Thanks for spotting that. In this alternative case, a group has prompted more directionally around a particular idea they've got. So they're looking at, for example, how they could increase sales on quiet days through actually just a piece of Excel analysis they've done originally. And then they're prompting through ideas around what sorts of suggestions could work for small businesses. So thinking about the context, thinking about the costs of maybe running a loyalty program through an app might be too expensive. So are there alternatives that we could think of that are a bit more low cost? And so these for me are really good examples of how the learning is being built, not simply by having solutions that Gen AI is creating, but in essentially building better and better prompts and figuring it out. And through that, then producing both more imaginative solutions, more robust solutions, frankly, but also importantly, reflections on the learning journey that they've gone through. Nigel.
Alistair, thanks very much. I think what I'd like to do is to think about the model that underlines what my colleagues have been talking about here in the terms of the interaction between the problem, the AI, and ourselves as decision makers or solution finders. Generally, of course, we are faced with a problem, whether it's a case study or an exercise or a problem at the end of a chapter in a book, and we try and frame that in some way. What is the real question here? And in the world of AI, we call that a prompt, and we feed that prompt, which is basically our interpretation of what the real question is, into the AI, and the AI eventually generates some kind of answer or solution. And by imagining that solution, we develop a better prompt, which again is fed into the AI, and an even better solution generated, which leads to an even better prompt. So, and so on. So we cycle around between the prompt and the AI here. The issue here is that traditionally we've been concentrating on solutions. We've marked students on getting a feasible or correct, in inverted commas, solution to something. Good solution, good mark, good grade, bad solution, bad mark, and so on. That almost certainly is no longer either relevant or useful. What's more important is to look at the interaction between the solutions you're getting and the prompts that you are giving. In other words, we've got to start assessing students and trying to develop learning as students that looks at the relationship between these two things, the prompts and the solution, because that's where the learning lies. There's no point in saying, give me a good solution and grading them on that. What we need to do increasingly is say, tell me how you got to your final solution. This is a dreadful cliche, but what is the journey, the learning journey that you took in order to get to that? I talked about critiquing earlier. Based on that, this is just one particular matrix that I use in some of my teaching, in terms of you get an answer, how do you critique it, how you think about it, how do you develop it? Is that, how would the type of operation change the AI answer? What about the operating environment, the strategic objectives, practicality, risks, and so on? We've got to start giving, I think, students help into how they do critique in that. And that means a whole load of soft skills, okay, perhaps formalized in terms of prompt engineering, but certainly to do with problem formulation, critical thinking, critiquing, contextualization, sensitivity analysis, conceptual modeling. Now, none of these are new. In effect, we've always required students to exhibit this kind of underlying levels of skill. What I think AI has done is made those more evident, and maybe we have to spend more time directly addressing those and helping students to exhibit those particular skills. So, in terms of students, what do we need to do? Kind of personal views. First of all, explain the relative importance of solution versus the learning in getting to that solution. It's no good us doing that if students don't fully understand that they're going to be assessed on the learning. Explaining how to cite and use AI in the role of prompt development, and there are papers on alternative ways to cite AI or AI-generated help. Give warning about AI's tendency towards hallucination, well known and already been talked about. Be clear about students' accountability for output. In other words, students have got to understand you can't blame the AI if you disagree with something. It's their responsibility to take. It's a tool. It's not something that you can transfer accountability to. Discussion about the ethics and responsibility of using AI, but most importantly, some kind of discussion of the need to use AI as a tool to learn, not just to produce concept. Final point, because we're running out of time. In writing the textbooks, there are two types of examples that we use. One is a kind of boxed example within the chapter that we call something like operations in practice, depending on the particular textbook. They're illustrations of what we've been talking about in the main text of the chapter and saying, look, here's an example of how this idea is used. And at the end of each chapter, we use end of chapter cases, more like a normal kind of business school type teaching case. They tend to be on the short side because those tend to be more popular, both with teachers and with students. And we've been writing this. I particularly have been writing quite a lot of these recently. And this is how I've been doing it using AI. First point to say is that nothing ever gets through that is pure AI generated. I may have used AI to get to a particular set of text or idea or piece of work, but nothing is just pure AI generated. You usually get some kind of inspiration. You read a piece in The Economist or the Financial Times or from a news source, and you think, oh, that might be an interesting example. For example, this week, a huge cruise liner was launched, the biggest ever build, and I'm thinking, could be an interesting example in terms of thinking about economies of scale and the relationship between various kind of competitive factors and scale. So, I think about that. I go back and forth using my model about refining the prompt, putting it in, can it be used, what's the history of this, so on. And this gives me an idea for a structure of a small case study or example. And then I use the AI to help me structure that particular thing. And it tells me, yes, there is a history and there are different points of view, and there's an environmental dimension to this that needs to be addressed. So based on that, I start thinking about an appropriate structure. So I break the example or the case down into a structure with different sections to it. And rather than use AI for the whole piece, I will use it almost paragraph by paragraph or point by point, depending how many sections there are. I can then use the AI to help me get to a final draft. How should I structure this? Can I merge these 2 points? How would I do it? And so on. Again, keep refining that. And eventually, without using AI, I come to some kind of final version that is, with the exception of Grammarly, that will put me right if my grammar's particularly bad, that will be my writing, not an AI's writing there. Now, the issue I want to stress here, that what I found is to make sure, and I want to finish with this point that I started with really, that in all cases, there is a filter that is me. I interact with the AI, but the final filter is my style, my responsibility, my ideas about what is interesting or original in this particular issue here. Now, that looks messy, like all process or stage models. If I did it in a realer version or a more accurate version, would it be even messier than that with lots of recycling? So in terms of writing for teaching, points that I would make. First, don't be blinded by what Gen AI seems to do. You have to impose a self-critical or a Gen AI critical filter all the time. I've been lucky because I spent a lot of my career teaching both executive MBAs and executives. And so you can use that experience to filter out something that does not seem plausible. Maybe it's not AI per se as such that holds the real potential. It's you working together with AI. That's the key issue, really. And so that's where focus, I think, should be addressed. There's a bit of a cliche going around on the parallel argument about how will AI affect people's jobs. And the cliche, it has a lot of truth in it, is that it's not AI that will take people's jobs. It's people with AI that will take people's jobs. So it's not AI that will replace lecturers. It's lecturers working with AI that will be dominant. For educators to use AI effectively, you need to keep using it. Can't stress this too much because it's accelerating in terms of its capabilities. Keep up with developments. I'm sorry, you just have to put time aside every week to keep up with what is happening in the world of AI, just like you do with your own subjects, and be open to implications in teaching and assessment. One of the questions that was kind of pre-submitted was, how is AI going to affect thesis writing? You know, when I had lots of doctoral students, I always used to make them put a big piece of paper up above their desk with 2 words on it, and those words were "so what?" and there was a question mark. In other words, always look at the implications of what's coming out. So for every development in AI, look at the implications. Wow, overrun a little bit. I apologize. Do we have time for questions, folks?
I think we can, if someone would like to raise their hand and ask a question, please do that. If we don't see any hands, we will, start to wrap up. But yeah, we can have, a question or two. So click to raise your hand if you would like to come off mute and ask something. While you're thinking about doing that or not doing that, I just wanted to let you know there is going to be a short poll that comes up once you leave this, once this session closes, asking what you would like to see in future webinars from Pearson. So we'd appreciate your suggestions for any topics you'd be
A couple of
interested
people,
in.
by the way, Kathy just then, and also others were saying, would it be possible to share the chat because it was so interesting? I think we will explore that question. There's instinctively a little bit of me that thinks, I wonder if there are the effects of chat rules that mean we can't simply share everyone's chat, but we'll look into it. I agree with you. There's a lot of interesting conversation there that would be great to be able to share for sure.
We'll be in touch with everyone who registered for the event today. So we'll let you have recordings, slides. We'll let you know how to contact Pearson to discuss our resources with us if you'd like to do that. But we really do thank you for attending today. And I really want to give big thanks to our panelists as well. Yes, so yeah, please, if we had a button for giving a round of applause, we could do that, couldn't we? But I'm not sure we do in this format. But thank you so much to Nigel, Alistair, Nicola, Lucas, and Dot as well for joining and sharing your knowledge. And thank you to Babby, my colleague who's working in the background to make everything work. I hope everyone goes home with some good ideas to take with you into teaching, things to trial, things to try out. Would any of our panelists like to say goodbye or anything?
Richard, sorry, we've got a few hands up. I don't know if you can speak.
I was unmuted, but I didn't. Yeah, just a quick one. How do you authors feel about Gen AI training on your books?
Yeah, that was an interesting question you raised earlier, actually, and my apologies that I didn't get to it. I was battling, it was like me and others against the masses. But I mean, in some senses, I think I've often felt in a similar way that when we know our textbook, for example, gets copied in various countries around the world without royalties coming through, and there's part of it that's a little bit of a shame, but there is also a little of me that's going, you know what, if people in the world are engaging with our subject and are engaging in operations and supply chain and being inspired that they can make the world better through some of our thoughts, I can kind of live with that. Just like I, could imagine that people, who have rip-offs of their novels being shared are going to be partly frustrated because they don't get royalties, but partly rather pleased that it's so popular. So I'm pretty relaxed about it because I still think that there are plenty of people who will sort of do the right thing and give credit in that sense.
There is a positive as well, I think, on that. You could postulate a future where the bigger the scraping of information by these large language models, the more worried one is about the authenticity of the work and the validity of the work, and trust becomes a major issue. And if you have something from a textbook or a set of textbooks from Pearson that are known to have been used for years or decades and are trusted, then that gives an extra dimension to any AI that's basically based on those.
It might be something to bring Lukasz in on, because Lukasz, you were talking a little bit about this, how in some apps they are essentially taking a segment of the overall data to give more credibility, whether that's in researchers wanting kind of ones that are in academic journals, etc. So I don't know if you could share.
Yes, so let's say in the scholar world, I think Elicit or Perplexity AI are examples where the large language models were taken and then fine-tuned and sort of additionally trained on, let's say, a massive library of scholarly articles. So it would resolve one of those issues that we mentioned during the webinar about generative AI sometimes hallucinating or making up fake existing content, because those systems can provide with specific reference, let's say, to the article, but still deploy the large language model aspects to summarize and aggregate and look for particular contextual angles in scholarly literature. So that's where I think, this will, of course, the textbook issue opens the kind of whole Pandora box of copyrighted content and training large language model, which I think is right now in the US as well as Europe at the center of conversation, much more in the context of fake images, voice, right? So the music industry, of course, we recently had about Taylor Swift deepfakes appearing on X as a very recent example of this. So that's where this conversation is very active, because there are some engines, like, for example, Midjourney was mentioned again, the text-to-image engines, which was used to train on a huge database of imageries that have a copywriting. So now there are already court cases in the US against them, saying that they shouldn't use the imagery from particular artists. On the other hand, there is Adobe Firefly, which only is using open source images and royalty-free images in their training process, saying, oh, by the way, we have clean hands. We are only using the content that has been entirely open source and with a fully available license to reuse them in any context. So yeah, it's not quite getting yet to the textual content, this conversation, but I think this year probably it will explode as one of the core central.
Right, but in the art world, there's
Mike, can you unshare your slides so we've got the full?
There's Nightshade, which is an app that poisons images that destroy the AI. It will, you can make a cat appear as a dog by putting a few pixels in, and it's a free app that's been released. And the idea is to stop people taking art. And so this poisoning of language models is an interesting approach.
There's a really interesting piece in, I think it's this week's Economist, about the almost arms race between the people that are trying to put this kind of copyright protection and the ones who are trying to get around it. Their view is that you're not going to stop it, but I don't know. They've even got something you can put on that will make a large screaming noise if you try and get rid of the protection.
Helene's
Let me interject a second on one aspect, because I've been using artificial intelligence for about 25 years in technology and answer learning, especially in the training in the military forces and the special forces. And one of the things that I've noticed is that there was a different approach. We created first order logic engine and knowledge base, and the things were connected in a way that you were really trying to simulate as much as possible the reaction of people and the learning process. But like in software, you started having software that generates software, yet YYCP in Unix or similar things, the rational row solution. What we've noticed is that the more the tools are used just to quick up the things, the less the people that use it understand what they do, make something which is maintainable, and in the end, learn something which is foundational. So I think that the challenge is to retain the aspect of Nicola Burgess, algorithm plus data structure equals programming, so that you understand the process. And when you look at these models, sometimes, especially those that are able to crawl online, will pick up also fake news, biases, like face recognition is very poor on Asian and Black people because of the training system. So we have all the problem of learning how to do the things. I did recently an experiment and then I stopped. Giving a prompt to a picture generator, ask a scenario, and in the scenario I mentioned engineers and scientists, and the picture is only male. Same scenario, but with an art gallery, and I've got male, female, and different people. So it's true that statistics would say that engineers are mostly male, or at least used to be, but if we don't learn how to wait and use a little bit of common sense in analyzing what is delivered, what is going to be delivered is going to funnel down at the end in something which is just the same thing, iRobot. Because if the models are fed with what they create, where is the creativity? What is the innovation? What is the possibility to do new things? Sorry for the rant.
Yeah, good point.
Sure. Helene, yeah, fire away. If you're still there. Helene Brondell?
Yeah, still. Oh, maybe.
And if not, then Ella, are you there? You have a hand up.
No, sorry, that was a mistake. I think I clicked on it by mistake. I haven't got a specific question.
Yeah, no worries. And Mike Wald as well. Mike had a hand up.
Oh, sorry, I came in at the beginning, but I didn't take it down. Just to point out, I've put it in the text, but since you know, a couple of years ago, you know, most of the training data scraped from the internet will be AI generated, not human generated. So it's like you know, a feedback loop on itself.
Yeah, and in some senses, that I think this issue of biases and reinforcing loops and stereotype reinforcements is something that Lukasz we were talking about over a coffee recently, and you know we've all got examples of that where you know you run even before Gen AI, right? You know, you do a Google image search for X, and X generates various very stereotypical assumptions. If you're, say, if you're asking for engineers, or you know, when you ask for images of people thinking, often it shows men thinking, for example, and you know these are pretty ridiculous kinds of stereotypes that we have to deal with. And I guess the challenge, and Lukasz, I'd be really interested in yours, is how do we get past that idea of these kind of recursive stereotypical loops when effectively it's drawing on the information there, and the information there is drawing on the information there, and so on ad infinitum.
Yeah, biases is a tricky one because, of course, as you both said correctly, they are pretty much embedded in the training knowledge that is used with those AI models. So that's why there is usually a long process after those models are trained of fine-tuning and moderation, where the human observers are going through many different questions and scenarios and are trying to adjust model responses to particular prompts, so it doesn't reflect the bias, with mixed success, I would say. But that's the only way we have right now of dealing with this kind of a human moderation or kind of control, and also then developing subsequent fine-tuned models, like earlier I mentioned Perplexity or Elicit for the scholarly literature, to narrow the functionality of the AI within much more constrained context, and therefore limit sort of the ranges in which it can bring those embedded biases into the responses.
Might be a good time to wrap up. We could be here all day going through all the questions. And yeah, we would love to have your feedback on this webinar. Get in touch with us. And I think Nigel and Alistair and Nicola have left their emails at the end of the slides as well, in case you want to follow up with them. Okay, Well, thank you all. Have a really good, lovely rest of the afternoon, or whatever time of day it is where you are.
Thank you, folks, for attending. It's been really, really interesting conversations all round.
Yeah, thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.